Rioting lasted 9 days.
The people of Liverpool woke up this morning to find a riot still going on in the heart of the city.
The mentality of every single British government that's ever been formed has been one of pretending black people aren't there.
More than 300 officers were hurt by missiles and petrol bombs.
But I don't think this is fundamentally a race issue.
Destruction expected to cost £10 million.
He was arrested for something he did not know about a car being mashed up. He was put in the back of a black car and he was beaten.
Children have been burnt. Not West Indians, black British. That is what I once said. They're burning our children.
From the late 70s into the early 80s, the temperature on Britain's streets was rising, racially, socially, economically. As a black person, you felt the tension which wasn't confined to one city. It was everywhere, regardless of age.
Been a few burglaries, young black lads like yourself, mostly.
Stepping out of the front door required having to be ready. Learning early on to be alert and aware about things most people never had to think about. Having to worry about police should be the last thing on anyone's mind. Why should anyone have to think about the very force meant to protect? You could stop, search, and harass you. Even worse, beat you. Who thinks about having to look out in fear of police before they see you? School was quick to exclude you with systematic racial bias, pushing you out before you ever had a fair start. For us, the victim card was non-existent, but it was realer than most. No mercy and no weakness around here. The era was latchkey kid settings, everyone outside, exposed, constant pressure like a foot on your neck, and your hands tied behind your back with a feeling of being held down while being told to move forward. The air was thick with racial tension, shaped by years of migration, shifting identities with a society struggling to redefine itself. For 2 decades, the minstrel show had been one of the BBC's most watched light entertainment programs.
It was a caricature of the worst forms of representation of black people. The BBC wasn't particularly concerned about the extent to which it was itself representative of the society.
But now, under mounting protest, challenged and confronted by the growing strength of anti-racist movements, it disappeared from the screen. Its absence marked more than the end of a television show. It signaled a turning point in British cultural life. You started to see black British voices slowly finding their way onto the nation's television sets. Programs with black families appeared, and black news reporters began to enter British living rooms. These were visible signs that the country was changing. And yet, beneath the surface, the reality was far more complicated.
Invaders have got black, brown and yellow races!
A final solution to the racial problems of this country. Our solution is repatriation. We want these people out.
Racism had not vanished. It lingered in institutions, in attitudes.
We must hold out the prospect of a clear end to immigration.
Britain was still adjusting to the large scale of Caribbean and African migration. Public conversations about racism were cautious, often muted, and many resisted the idea that change was either necessary or inevitable.
And the reason I stopped you is when you came out the barns, but no offence to you, but you're a black male, okay? I'm not going to lie to you.
We also need to give police the confidence to use existing laws, such as stop and search.
Okay, name me knives.
At least you just come back from a strip search. Why are you not doing this?
Made the big changes around stop and search to give the police the ability, more freedom, flexibility and powers to apply stop and search.
Please, bro, look, that one and that one.
Listen to me.
Stop! Get what's the f*** is he done? Get him off the floor!
There is officers who are racist, and because they are racist, they stop the black youths, they frame them, they are being beaten, they've been planted many times. It's in open court, and nothing is done about it.
Rose a rose.
Whoever draws the ace of spades is to go out and nick the first black bastard they clap eyes on.
Nick him for what? You'll learn.
We just went out and made a beeline for whosoever we wanted to arrest.
Stay down! Get back! Don't resist! Shut it, you fucking black bastard!
People had no chance of proving their innocence. Evidence was planted, that was a common practice, and assaulting people was almost a daily occurrence.
Looks like he had a fall.
I myself, I had certain experience with the police. It's not one time them beat I, it's a good whole heap of times so them beat I'm on up, you know. And them lick me with the trunk chandelier, you know what I mean? And they mash up my eye one time.
The UK's biggest police force has a nasty habit it cannot seem to kick. Claims of racist assaults in broad daylight and behind closed doors in police cells.
The late 70s and the early 80s, when I was a uniformed officer, I, shamefully, saw racism, was affected by it, became a part of it, and simply was too cowardly to stand up and speak out about it.
Genuinely, I thought I was in that film Zulu. It's bloody wogs, mate. All the same. Right, mate?
For a black police officer serving in the 70s into the 80s, the uniform carried a weight that went far beyond the job.
They used to play cards in the canteen. I wouldn't be allowed to join in, go to the bath and cry. Buttons ripped off my uniform, my ties were slashed. I wanted to be liked. I just wanted to be accepted.
Inside the force, the culture could be openly hostile, with the sting of racist language in locker rooms, canteens, and the quiet exclusion from conversations.
Next time one of you fuckers want to ride this on my fucking locker, do it right, I'm fucking here!
The absence of mentors and promotion opportunities that never seemed to come. In stations where almost every face was white, isolation was not a feeling, it was a daily reality.
20 minutes it took us from Wessex. There's cars around the fucking corner. You're all over the radio, the bastards didn't back you up.
In some forces, there were only a handful of black officers, often with no one to turn to who truly understood their experience. Some colleagues assumed they had only been recruited because of their race, long before any formal positive action policies existed.
Can't talk. Normally you guys are good at talking, why don't you back me? Simple question.
They were made to feel they were never quite part of the police family, viewed instead with suspicion or reduced to symbols of diversity rather than recognised as officers in their own right. Pressure came from all angles, which included the communities many of them had grown up in, facing a different kind of accusation and pressure that they were seen as working for a system that policed black neighbourhoods aggressively.
Being a police officer, you are putting yourself somewhat aside from the rest of the community. You become alienated from certain sections of the community. If you've got a black face, obviously it's going to be worse for you.
Forcing laws that fell hardest on their own people, the traitor, the sellout. Betrayal was a default, caught between two worlds.
You do get the odd comment, traitor, Judas, you're on the other side, you know, you're not one of us anymore. You know, you do get those, but that also I've blocked out of my mind. I know that maybe a few people, you would have got a few West Indian or Asians joining, but because their friends said, no, you don't want to join them, then they all say, oh, we're not going to join.
If I join the police, like most of my friends, they don't like the police, and I lose a lot of friends that way, because they go around harassing people and all that, and they would hate me for that.
The Met acknowledged that they don't recruit enough black and Asian officers, but many of the committee's recommendations have been standard force policy for years.
Even as recruitment slowly increased, most remained in the lower ranks with little influence over policy, strategy, or the style of policing that communities were protesting against. They became the visible face of an institution they did not control, expected to represent it, defend it, and absorb the anger directed at it.
Can I just ask you, is there anyone here at all who would like to join the police when you leave school? Can you put your hands up? Anybody?
For generations, the relationship between the police and black people has been unlike any other. Some might argue that the police have dealings with all races, but the connection with black communities is unique. rooted in history, deep, almost tribal, yet always adversarial.
And the only way to defuse this situation is by decreasing the presence of police within the area at the present time.
They want police withdrawal, see, and I'm not prepared to do that.
When we look at the taxation of IC3, we see more than numbers on paper. We see a weapon of psychological warfare. Its roots stretch back to slavery. The control and suppression are not just financial, but mental, which causes a relentless endurance of insidious oppression. When we talk about the police, we often talk about power, real tangible power, written into law and enforced by the state. They hold the authority to detain, to search, to arrest. They can use force when they believe it's justified, and in some places even lethal force. They have the right to stop you, question you, and decide in that moment what happens next.
They came in, they rushed upstairs first to see if anybody else was upstairs. Then they pushed a warrant in my hand. And then they just started to search through my property. And when I went to the station, they kept saying to me, it's your bastard's birthday tomorrow. How do you feel? It's your bastard's birthday. All them things they were saying to me.
Studies of American riots show that most are triggered by an incident involving the police. But that usually reflects a background of hostility between the community and policemen.
It's the way it's applied that has brought it discredit. It all depends on the officer's discretion. He, poor young man out in the street in the middle of the night, has to decide, does that man look to me as if he's been up to mischief or not? And when you ask, how was his discretion trained, I think that's where we slip up.
I would never say this in class. If you did not discriminate and you did not bring out your prejudices, you'd be a shit copper, and you wouldn't stop anyone because of the colour, because of the race, because of how they dress, because of how they finger. You'd be a shit copper. You know, I make jokes about black people. Everybody does.
Yeah.
You know, but you don't do it to their face. No. And you don't do it in class.
A police officer calls a black man a nigger. Shouldn't he be dismissed?
No. Why should no, indeed not. Like everything else, why should he be dismissed for calling him a nigger?
Because I have a term of abuse.
That's a matter of opinion.
I don't use it. Nigger. They use that themselves. We can't use nigger.
What about what?
No, I've called the black man to his face a nigger.
What would you call it?
I'd call him a packy, if I was perfectly honest.
PC Adrian Harrison was comfortable that the police were racist as an institution.
You know then, before he joined up, that the whole force was totally racist?
Definitely. I'm cool with it, yeah. Because at the end of the day, for the last 9 years, I've been working for an organisation who is totally politically correct.
If you come in from outside, if you're white and he's black, and if you think in their area people are all rogues anyway, then anybody you meet on the street is subject for discretion.
White 18-year-old lads ram raid, black lads deal drugs. It's a fact. Absolute bollocks, but nonetheless, that's what popular stereotypes and misconceptions are.
We should expect to encounter, during our careers, a very high number of racist officers. He said that many held very deeply entrenched prejudicial views on race, and despite an ongoing education programme within the force on race relations, it had so far failed to eradicate the problem.
In the years between, tensions continued to rise. Stop and search operations became more frequent, and the policing of black communities grew increasingly heavy-handed. After the riots of 1981, police attention on predominantly black areas intensified rather than eased, as if expecting unrest to return. Meanwhile, unemployment soared throughout the 1980s, hitting young black people the hardest and deepening feelings of frustration and exclusion.
We are not in favour at all of having any no-go areas or any ghetto areas. We believe in having a multiracial housing policy.
Community workers insist that it's against this backdrop and a general increased police presence that the troubles must be seen.
I know that among young West Indians there is a higher rate of unemployment. There tends to be. Many of them are unskilled, and it's not always easy to get a job for the unskilled at the moment. As far as high unemployment among any young people is concerned, the answer is the same. We have stepped up the amount of money and the number of job chances we're trying to give.
3 John factories have just closed down, and that shot unemployment up by 69% compared with last year. More than 13,000 people are out of work, and that includes lots of youngsters.
An unemployment rate of 44%, 80% among young blacks.
To understand the pressure that the kids are going through is to understand the pressure that the parents are going through. Because if I'm under pressure, my kids are under pressure. If I'm in bad housing, it affects my kids. If I'm in dead-end, poor, low-paid jobs, it affects my kids.
1 in 3 men who live here are unemployed. Among young blacks, the jobless figure's even higher. 9 out of 10 are without work.
There are 21,000 unemployed. That's 1 in 5.
There is a high rate of burglaries. This year, 1 in 4 people will be burgled on the estate.
1980s London, the media's gaze fell heavily on black communities, from Brixton to Tottenham, Hackney to Notting Hill.
Hackney has the reputation of being one of the country's poorest areas.
Hackney's been labelled Britain's poorest borough, and we do resent the label a little bit.
Brixton's problems are the problems of many inner city areas: unemployment, inadequate housing and poor services. The recession has hit deprived areas like Brixton particularly hard.
Headlines and broadcasts painted a picture of neighbourhoods defined by deprivation, disorder and danger.
Crime flourishes amid the decay. This is the no-go estate where postmen, rent collectors and even doctors refuse to tread without a police escort.
It's become the most infamous council estate in Britain. Broadwater Farm was well known locally as a dumping ground for problem families.
The evidence would suggest that black people in the borough have generally a worse service from the housing department in terms of where they live.
Basically, what you would call a ghetto, in inverted commas, is something which is created as a product of a racist society and a racist system. So it's really saying to blacks, you stay there, don't step out, don't come into town where there are nice white people and we've got our nice shops and so on. Even if you riot, stay in there.
To most people, the word Brixton conjures up the image of a black ghetto. In fact, only 1 in 3 of Brixton's population is either Asian or West Indian. 2 out of every 3 are white. Community workers say Brixton isn't black, it's simply poor. And lots of blacks live there because they can't afford to live anywhere else.
Through news broadcasts, headlines and sensational reporting, the media has reinforced a stigma that associates black communities with crime and disorder. This narrative not only misrepresents these neighbourhoods, but also fuels the broader stereotype of the black criminal, turning places of struggle and resilience into symbols of fear and prejudice. In the early hours of the 18th of January 1981, a fire tore through a house party in New Cross. 13 young black people died. The tragedy would become known as the New Cross Fire. And for many, it was not just a disaster, but a turning point. As families mourned, anger grew. The police response was seen by the local community as slow, distant, and lacking urgency. In a city already marked by unemployment, over-policing, and the use of stop and search, it reinforced a painful belief that black lives were not being protected.
And more than 80 hours of evidence from nearly 60 witnesses. It took the jury just 2 hours to come to an open verdict. Mrs. Armser Ruddock, who gave the party and lost 2 children in the fire, was in no mood to accept it.
An open verdict was what I expected, but it is not what it should be. It should be murder.
On 2nd March, thousands marched in the Black People's Day of Action, demanding justice and recognition. The wounds were still raw weeks later when unrest erupted in Brixton during the 1981 Brixton riots. Official reports led by Lord Scarman spoke of social disadvantage and a breakdown of trust, but for those who lived it, the connection was already clear. Years later, the Macpherson Report would name institutional racism in British policing. In 1981, that truth was still being shouted in the streets, born from grief in New Cross and carried into the flames of Brixton. Although the notorious sus laws were eventually abolished, the attitudes behind them remained. Policing in these communities still carried an air of suspicion and aggression. This toxic environment culminated in 2 tragic events: the shooting of Dorothy Cherry Gross in Brixton, and just a week later, the death of Cynthia Jarrett during a police search in Tottenham. Both incidents involved aggressive police raids, carried out with little regard for who lived in the homes being entered, and both reignited the anger that had been simmering for years.
At 7 a.m, 7 police armed with Smith & Wesson 38 revolvers ringed this house in Brixton. 2 entered with a search warrant looking for 19-year-old Michael Gross, but he wasn't there. Inside was only his mother and 5 children.
Well, the doctor just said I will never walk again.
And I saw my mum on the floor. I saw a man with a gun in his hand. He was shouting at my mum, aggressively, repeatedly asking for my brother. I started shouting at this man, "What have you done to my mum?"
He was screaming and shouting repeatedly, "What have you done to my mum?"
And he just pointed the gun at me and said, you know, someone better shut this fucking kid up.
He said he became hysterical, but the officer pointed the gun at me and told me to shut up.
The stress I was under at the time, my finger must have been pulling on the trigger. It was all so quick. I saw a flash and Mrs. Gross was suddenly lying on the ground.
It was the loud noise that made me run down the stairs. By the time I got down the stairs, there was 3 police dogs in there and police rushing everywhere, and one of them had a gun. And they wouldn't let us go in and see my mum, so we didn't know that she was shot at that time. They made us go in the front room, and it was after my gran came they told her that she'd been shot.
And she thought there were burglars coming through the front door, and she actually jumped on my husband. She had children in the room. She was sleeping in the downstairs room, and it was just her natural reaction, I suppose, to protect them. She just jumped, and his gun went off. He didn't deliberately aim, didn't mean to fire, but the bullet went into her shoulder and left her paralysed. You know, it was a terrible, terrible accident.
Petrol bombs rained down as riot squad police held the line behind their shields. Scenes were occurring all round Brixton as the disturbances spread in all directions from the Brixton police station.
There's still burning in Brixton in South London after an evening of rioting. It began as a demonstration of anger after police had shot and seriously wounded a woman while searching her house. Then a crowd attacked the police station and gangs of youths began burning and looting buildings.
A 4-storey building collapsed after being set alight by petrol bombs. The top 3 stories were flats over a furniture shop, but they were thought to be unoccupied.
The shooting sparked the 1985 Brixton riots. In court, it was put to Mr. Lovelock that the tension between police and community existed before the shooting. Dexter DSQC, representing the Gross family, said, "We can perfectly see your attitude towards that house, that family, and the black residents of Brixton. You treated them as the opposition. It was us versus them for you, wasn't it?" Lovelock replied, "In dealing with certain elements, there was some of that."
Hundreds of young people, black and white, clashed in long-running battles, which ended in murder and tragedy.
And we could see, by the light of burning vehicles, missiles just raining down on the police.
I saw it as my right to go and throw stones at police and that, you know, and to be honest with you, I think, looking back, they expected that.
Knocked at and said, "Were you in that night? What did you see?" We checked out every bit of evidence we heard about storage of stuff, and there's absolutely no evidence that there was anything stored away, that there was any indications of planning. What there was evidence on were the rumours of riots, and they seemed to emanate all the time from the police. People would tell us they'd heard a policeman had said 2 weeks before, 6 weeks before, the night before, either directly to them or to somebody they knew, that there were going to be riots, mainly around Wood Green.
The police themselves were preparing for riots at Wood Green Shopping Centre, which they believed was going to be looted, and Tottenham High Road. Now, if that was the case, then people were going to take these petrol bombs that were apparently there and be prepared and take them to Wood Green and throw them. The police said police were preparing, I reiterate, for riots elsewhere rather than on the estate. So the premeditation is just, not only is there no evidence, but the police approach to it contradicts what was going on.
The late 60s marked a decisive turning point for British policing as a surge of large-scale demonstrations and civil unrest forced a long overdue modernisation of public order training. The events at Grosvenor Square in '68 were particularly significant, exposing serious weaknesses in the police response. Officers deployed that day had little more than their standard uniforms and basic equipment. There were no protective helmets, shields, or specialist formations, and the lack of preparation made it clear that traditional methods were no longer adequate for the scale and intensity of the modern protest. Forces began to rethink their entire approach. Training became more structured, with an emphasis on discipline, coordinated movement, and clearly defined tactics for dealing with hostile crowds. These developments were reinforced the following year by the outbreak of disorder in Northern Ireland, where the scale and persistence of violence had a profound influence on mainland policing. From this period emerged the concept of the police support unit, a dedicated, highly trained formation equipped with standardized drills and specialist protective clothing, including shields, helmets, and flame-retardant overalls. By the mid to late 70s, PSU training had become a routine part of police preparation for public order. The process accelerated further in response to the Brixton, Toxteth and Handsworth riots, leading to the introduction of national standards for public order training and the widespread adoption of more advanced protective equipment. What had begun as a reactive reform in the late 60s evolved into a fully professional, nationally coordinated system for managing public disorder. For decades, the term institutional racism has shaped the debate around policing in the UK. It's a contested label, but the evidence is hard to ignore. Senior figures like Gavin Stevens, chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, have acknowledged that policing is built on policies and practices created without black voices. Investigations have described anti-black bias as baked into the design of the Metropolitan Police. Amnesty International warns that new technologies, like predictive policing, only deepen the disparity. And long before all this, the Macpherson report, after the murder of Stephen Lawrence, concluded that the Met was institutionally racist.
We do live in a society that has got institutionalised racism, and it is our responsibility and duty to try and make sure that A, that's eradicated, and B, that it doesn't interfere with the discharge of our responsibilities to the community.
Cases like that of Stephen Lawrence reveal clear signs of institutional racism, and the reasons for this become obvious when you look closely at how the police behaved. From the very beginning, the Lawrence family were treated not as grieving victims, but almost as suspects. Officers questioned them in ways that suggested mistrust, responding to their pain with coldness, formality, and a striking lack of empathy. Communication was poor, distant, and at times hostile. Instead of focusing their energy on pursuing the racist killers, the police diverted valuable time investigating the family, digging into their history, searching for anything that might discredit them. This behaviour fed into a wider racist stereotype, the assumption that black families must have some link to criminality. As a result, evidence was ignored, leads were missed, key suspects weren't arrested promptly, and witnesses were left without protection or support. At times, it appeared as though the police were acting like suspects themselves, reacting defensively, covering up mistakes, and shielding each other from accountability.
Macpherson report, fucking kicking the bollocks for any white man that was. He fucking deserved it. His mum and dad are a fucking pair of sponges, and they've fucking seen a good opportunity and sponged it for everything they can get their hands on.
This became even clearer when whistleblower Peter Francis revealed that he had been tasked with gathering intelligence on the Lawrence family, monitoring them of any activism.
And I, through my circles, come up with something along the lines of the family were political activists, if somebody in the family was involved in demonstrations, drug dealers, anything.
Peter Francis says of some of those running his unit, including his direct senior officer, I witnessed much more overt racism from certain members of management. HN 86 would refer to the Black Justice campaigns using the term monkeys.
In other words, more effort was spent trying to protect the police from criticism than trying to secure justice for Stephen. A similar pattern can be seen in the Cherry Gross case. Here, the issue was police brutality, yet after Gross was shot in her own home, the police seemed more concerned with justifying the raid than with helping the family. She was left without immediate medical care, and there was no apology or admission of wrongdoing. Instead, her family were made to feel as though they were to blame, treated not as victims but as potential threat.
The mere fact that I was the son is the reason why they then were spying upon me, which again is adding insult to injury, because here I am at a very vulnerable time going through this case, and I'm being spied upon and I don't know. And I'm only being spied upon because I'm the son of the woman who was shot, wrongfully shot by police back in 1985, which sparked the uprising.
The police narrative focused on defending the raid, and ultimately they never provided a proper explanation for why it happened the way it did. Just as the McPherson report later highlighted in the Lawrence case, the actions taken in the Gross case were shaped by deep-rooted racist assumptions about black families and communities. In much of the American South, policing grew from slave patrols formed in the 1700s in colonies like South Carolina and Virginia. These armed white men hunted runaways, enforced control through violence, and crushed resistance. After the Civil War, many of these patrols evolved into formal police departments, embedding their legacy into American law enforcement. While not every US police department began as slave catchers, Southern policing is rooted in slave patrols, a legacy that still shapes racial disparities today. Britain's patrols differed, but the nation was deeply tied to the transatlantic slave trade. The Metropolitan Police, founded in 1829 to maintain order and protect property, often focused on surveilling and controlling marginalized groups like the poor and immigrants. Though not created to target black people, its structures enabled disproportionate policing of minority communities as their numbers grew. Policing practices such as stop and search, surveillance and discrimination intensified against black communities, reflecting Britain's enduring legacy of racial hierarchy from the transatlantic slave trade. The black criminal stereotype and the history of riots or uprisings are deeply connected, both historically and in how society and media interpret black resistance. From Watts to Brixton to Ferguson, each time black people rose up against injustice, the world was told they were criminals, not citizens. But what if that narrative was never about crime at all? What if it was about control? The black criminal stereotype hasn't just shaped how we see riots, it's shaped how we understand black resistance itself. Policing the Crisis was the title of Stuart Hall's research into the crisis of hegemony in the 70s and how moral panics were created over black crime to divert the public's attention from the failings of capitalism during that period. Hall talked about the moral panic concerning black muggers.
The British National Party stands for law and order. Crimes like mugging, we will stamp out. Let no one be any doubt in that.
These figures should now be used by the black community to pull into line those black youngsters in these areas who are perpetrating the particular type of crime called mugging.
Which led to young black males being seen as a folk devil within society. This diversionary tactic blamed young black males for the social problems in society in the 1970s, and it diverted attention away from the failings of the ruling class. It also led to stop and search policies as police clamped down on the folk devil of the black mugger, and this ultimately led to civil unrest in the 1980s with riots in Brixton, Toxteth and Bristol.
In St Paul's in Bristol, it ended in a pitched battle between mainly black youths and police.
A group of youngsters gathered on the ground opposite the Black and White Cafe. Fighting began when some tried to re-enter buildings that the police had already searched. Tension mounted, another 350 officers who had been waiting in nearby streets were ordered in.
In the St Paul's area of Bristol, local council set up an inquiry. It's only just reported, and suggestions for repairing police-community relations remain little more than ideas.
A year later, trouble followed in Brixton. It raged for 3 days and nights, injuring more than 500 police and civilians.
It's obviously going to be quite a job clearing this area out. Bombs, bricks and bottles at the police lines.
and suddenly Brixton, a South London area of high unemployment, was under siege. The streets littered with broken glass and rubble and burning cars.
Nobody quite knows why the rioting started, but when it did, about half a dozen policemen were forced by a barrage of bricks and bottles into this cafe here.
If the public inquiry can get to the truth, then it will be solved out.
It was the police, says the report, that stood between our society and a total collapse of law and order in the streets of an important part of the capital. But Lord Scarman issues this warning to them about their methods.
Whatever the problems, nothing but nothing justifies what happened on Saturday and Sunday night.
That summer in Toxteth in Liverpool, rioting flared again. 40 properties were gutted and tear gas was used for the first time in mainland Britain.
Rioting lasted 9 days.
The people of Liverpool woke up this morning to find a riot still going on in the heart of the city.
The mentality of every single British government that's ever been formed has been one of pretending black people aren't there.
Lost control of a half-mile stretch of Handsworth when a mob of 400 turned it into an inferno during an orgy of destruction. The police were powerless to stop it.
The police van lay on its side, burning. The police backed off to put on their riot gear. After the overnight rioting had died down, police were once again holding the line on the streets of Handsworth.
There is little doubt that police were slowing clearing the trouble spots.
Together, the history of riots are interlocked themes that reveal how racism is sustained through narrative and perception. The media and authorities have often used that stereotype to delegitimize the protest. Instead of seeing them as political acts of resistance, they're framed as lawless riots led by criminals. Films like Babylon from the 1980s capture the atmosphere of Britain during a time of deep social unrest. Against a backdrop of mass unemployment, the film exposes the systemic racial tensions that defined the era.
You're everywhere. Jungle bunnies. This was a lovely area before you come here, lovely. You fuck off back to your own countries, you jungle bunny.
It portrays a society where police harassment and brutality were commonplace, with the sus laws being used disproportionately against young black men. Throughout the film, the police appear antagonistic, abusive, and dismissive, mirroring the real experiences of many black Britons at the time. The characters' struggles with poverty, joblessness, and limited opportunities reflect the harsh realities of inner city life under Thatcher's Britain. Yet beyond documenting these struggles, Babylon also feels like a warning, a prelude to the riots that would soon erupt. The film captures the growing anger, alienation, and deep mistrust of the police that were about to boil over into open rebellion on the streets of Brixton and beyond. From the Watts riots in Los Angeles to the uprising in Detroit, history seemed to repeat itself within just 2 years. Across the Atlantic, Britain followed a similar pattern. Only 4 years separated the first Brixton riots in 1981 from the second outbreak in 1985. And before those, the Notting Hill disturbances of 1976 had already revealed deep racial divisions in London. Like the film Babylon, set in South London's Brixton, Notting Hill experienced a similar story of tension and resistance. In the early 1970s, the Mangrove Nine were arrested after protesting police harassment of the Mangrove restaurant, a vital hub for the local black community. In the film series Small Axe, Mangrove captures this powerful moment, reflecting years of growing mistrust and confrontation between the community and the police. The protest led to a landmark trial at the Old Bailey in 1971, where, for the first time, the British judicial system officially recognised racial prejudice within the police force. The Notting Hill riots of 1976 would come later, but the Mangrove story foreshadows those events, revealing how systemic racism and police oppression had been building for years until the tension finally reached breaking point. Despite these warnings, nothing had truly changed. In fact, the situation had worsened. In In the aftermath of the 2011 London riots, the city and the Metropolitan Police found themselves in turmoil. The unrest had gripped London in a chokehold, and public confidence in law enforcement was shaken. Amid the chaos, then Mayor Boris Johnson demanded answers.
To riot, people who go out to disturb the peace of others in this city will continue to be met with the full force of the law.
He wanted to know how many gang members were operating in London, and more importantly, how to stop them. Under political pressure to respond, the police devised what they presented as a solution: the gang's matrix.
What you had is a tool that was created by the Metropolitan Police to satisfy questions from Boris Johnson after the London riots. We had Boris asking, how many gang members have you got in London? And so we had to answer him. And so the gangs matrix was born as one of the ways of basically being able to count gang members.
So many young people out there are entering and they're putting them on this matrix just because they think they're in gangs. Is that there's so many parents that don't know that their young people are actually part of a gang matrix. There's even a colour system, and that ranks you, even your progression in life is ranked on this gang matrix.
Designed to satisfy political demands as much as to address public safety, the matrix became a symbolic cure to the unrest. It allowed officials to claim control, to show they were cracking down. Yet, beneath the surface, the matrix served a different purpose. It appeared to draw a direct line between the riots and London's gang activity, a narrative that aligned neatly with Boris Johnson's public stance.
Let me be absolutely clear. Those responsible for this violence and looting will be made to face the consequences of their action.
The gang's matrix was not merely a police database. It evolved into a sprawling register shared with agencies like the DVLA, housing associations, local authorities, and even employers.
Heard about it. I never knew that it affected getting jobs via CRB and checks and all of that, because I've never been to prison in my life or been in the probation system. It just says that I'm just a part of the gang. It doesn't give me no markings, or it doesn't highlight any colour.
Its influence reached as far as Criminal Records Bureau checks, effectively branding individuals as risks long before, and often without, any criminal conviction.
A concerted all-out war on gangs and gang culture. This isn't some side issue. It is a major criminal disease that has infected streets and estates across our country. Stamping out these gangs should be a new national priority.
4 reviews, including the Metropolitan Police Service's own review, said that there was no evidence of gang orchestration. Cameron and Johnson then went on to help to create those gangs.
It is all too clear that we have a big problem with gangs in our country.
So that we could have the narrative, so that the narrative that they gave us could then appear to have some kind of justification.
For too long, there's been a lack of focus on the complete lack of respect shown by these groups of thugs.
Today, this government is telling us that 3 youths can be a gang.
This is a database, 90% black and ethnic minority, who are being slapped with the label gang nominal.
At the heart of all the violence sits the issue of street gangs. Territorial, hierarchical, and incredibly violent.
More than 3/4 of the database is black, of gangs matrix, and only 1/4 of people involved in London, serious youth violence in London are black. How can you explain such a huge disparity?
The black community, the vast majority of whom in these communities, incidentally, are decent, law-abiding people horrified at what is happening, need to be mobilised in denunciation of this gang culture that is killing innocent young black kids.
Once you're stereotyped as being a gang and stigmatised, you're just pushed out onto the streets.
But we won't stop this by pretending that it isn't young black kids doing it.
What will happen is that you're going to have a lot of members of the community being targeted unnecessarily because of the way the police operate already in the terms of racial bias towards certain communities, especially the black community.
I have 2 brothers. I come from a place called Tottenham. That means that these people today would define myself and my brothers as being members of a gang. In previous years gone by, say when we had the skinheads, for example, the skinheads were committing crime against other white people. They didn't call that white on white crime. They said it was a working class sub-youth culture, and that then meant that we responded to it differently. There's a range of interventions. When they dismissed it as black-on-black crime, we got an Operation Trident, a unit that is as racist to the core as any racist unit that we've ever seen, and that very same unit now is the gangs unit. And that's why we have this predisposition of just looking at young black kids as gangs.
Presented as a risk assessment tool, The Matrix leaned heavily on the word gang as a buzzword to justify its reach, but the data told another story. The overwhelming majority of those listed were black, young men and boys categorized as potential threats simply by association, appearance, or postcode. In practice, The Matrix became a convenient mechanism to profile and penalise black Londoners, from school-age children to adults. It was, in essence, a modern form of surveillance and social control, hidden tax on being black in the capital.
The Narrows at the end.
The criminal stereotype is probably the most dangerous stereotype of them all. It has a long history of consistently being embedded in legal systems, globally spread, directly linked to police and punishment. It's the perfect weapon for fueling fear, justifying harsher sentences, higher incarceration, being guilty before innocent employment restrictions, and schooling, which for some is a disguise for a PRU. This eats blacks for breakfast.
Response to black-on-black gun crime.
We have a major problem with black gangs.
This gang culture that is killing innocent young black kids. But we won't stop this by pretending that it isn't young black kids doing it.
Stereotypes rarely stay confined to the streets. Once they enter film, they become amplified, repeated again and again until they start to feel like reality. Cinema has the power to take small cultural details, like clothing or hairstyles, and turn them into symbols. And that's the real danger of stereotypes, not the tiny sliver of truth they may contain, but the way they erase individuality. But when those symbols are framed negatively, they reinforce the very tropes that define and often stigmatise a whole group of people. Take the British media moral panic around the name Yardies, for example.
The cult of the gun gangs is a way of life in Jamaica.
A term that had originally meant someone from Jamaica, but was sensationalized by tabloids and police to mean ruthless, drug-dealing Jamaican gangs terrorizing London. These headlines didn't stay contained. It fed into Hollywood, where films in the 90s like Marked for Death translated those caricatures onto the big screen, staying consistent with the chaotic, reckless, and violent gang activity, with no structure or discipline, at the same time creating a template for other films like Predator 2 to follow suit. Portraying black magic and rituals, suggesting that Jamaican criminals were not only dangerous but supernatural, unpredictable, and outside the bounds of rational humanity. This type of tabloid fear and cinematic exaggeration shaped most people's perceptions. Audiences were pushed to link Jamaicans with crime. Through constant conditioning by the media, the act itself, a black man committing a crime, became almost secondary. The mere sight was enough to trigger fear, shaped not by reality, but by a distorted image that had been carefully constructed and reinforced over time. And while white crime was treated as a default, black crime was framed outside the norm as black-on-black violence.
Rival black gangs are killing each other.
The Met's campaign against black-on-black crime. Police know they cannot deal with black-on-black gun crime alone.
Singling out black people for a type of crime that occurs across all racial groups.
In response to black-on-black gun crime.
We have a major problem with black gangs.
You started seeing the Met Police's media campaign for Operation Trident. Everywhere you looked, there were posters and short films about tackling gun crime. But what struck the most wasn't just the message, it was the images. Every poster seemed to show black hands holding guns. Every reenactment featured young black actors, and every story was framed through the lens of black communities. Across bus stops, billboards, and TV spots, the same pattern repeated. A portrayal that made gun crime look like a black issue, something happening only among people of the same race and colour. It felt less like an awareness campaign and more like a narrative being pushed, one that unfairly singled out and stigmatised an entire community. Now, the point isn't to pretend that crime doesn't exist in these communities or among certain groups. Of course it does. The real issue is the way the media frames it, singling out one group, boxing them in, and then painting an entire race with the same brush. Meanwhile, crime is something every race is involved in, but only some get branded as the face of it. It's important to be clear, black people are not the face of crime. That idea comes from racist stereotypes, racist media coverage, biased policing, and unequal justice systems have overrepresented black people as criminals. For decades, headlines, mugshots, and political language have reinforced harmful associations that don't reflect reality. These portrayals didn't come out of nowhere. They date back to colonial propaganda, which portrayed Africans and Caribbeans as dangerous or savage. Yet, because of existing societal stereotypes, drill can reinforce the image of young black men as intimidating or criminal. UK drill is a rap subgenre from inner city communities reflecting poverty, policing, and violence. Videos often feature young black or mixed heritage men in dark tracksuits and masks, posing on streets with aggressive gestures. These visuals are part performance and part protection, expressing emotion, pain, and resilience. Drill can be very dark, with lyrics that often describe real violence and gang rivalries. Police have used these videos and words as evidence in court, connecting artists to crime. And this is nothing new. Throughout history, the police have repeatedly tried to control and regulate music, often shutting down venues before events could even begin, a pattern that stretches all the way back to the days of the jungle music.
Jungle for me is another modern phenomenon which will cross over and start to influence major artists.
Jungle raves in the 90s started to challenge traditional control of nightlife and public space. Authorities often cracked down, not just because of crime concerns, but because of discomfort with black youth claiming cultural and physical space. Promoters often struggled to get licenses. Events were frequently shut down by police. Black cultural innovation was often criminalised. The media often framed them as problems, violent, antisocial, criminal, or corrupting youth.
Call it them. Why do you think that I'm stupid? I got brains I can never be.
I don't call what I do grime. Where's the person to stand up there and say, I called it grime or I called it urban? No one, because who named it? All them people that sit in their offices, whatever, looking down on man.
Yeah, I've come too far to turn around. Can't look back, I need to turn my life around.
The parallels between the UK and the US when it comes to media bias and over-policing have a similar pattern. The UK media has long shown moral panic around genres linked to black and working class youth, from jungle and garage in the 90s to grime and drill today.
Social media companies have removed hundreds of drill tracks at the police's request, but Instagram's oversight board recently said it was concerned drill is being over-policed.
It is a textbook, really, of what goes wrong when rap music is introduced. It always brings in stereotypes about criminality, about violence, and particularly when you've got groups of youngsters in the dock, the music becomes the soundtrack for shoring up the idea of the gang.
I spread the skins and found cherries in the middle. If I like the wiggle, I call her Eliza Doolittle.
When audiences see images of council estate backdrops combined with what the media already portrays about those areas, a certain perception begins to form. The constant over-policing of young black men reinforces this bias, making it easy for viewers to connect stereotypes with what they see on screen. As a result, when an artist raps in that setting, or when a group appears together in a music video, they are often assumed to be dangerous. To many outside viewers, the image of a group of young black men in an estate is automatically read as a gang, rather than a collective of artists or friends expressing their reality. However, when UK or American rappers reference violence, deprivation, or postcode identity, they often articulate authentic social realities, offering commentary on poverty, policing, and systemic inequality that mainstream narratives tend to overlook. In this sense, rap can serve as a powerful medium of social expression and resistance. However, certain artists and commercial forces within the music industry have been criticised for glorifying violence, criminality, or hypermasculinity, which can perpetuate negative perceptions of black communities. Moreover, When these representations are consumed without context, they are frequently misinterpreted by audiences and media institutions, reinforcing existing stereotypes that associate these communities with danger and deviance. Thus, while rap itself emerges from lived experience, its commodification and selective interpretation can unintentionally sustain the very stigmas it seeks to challenge. The term rude boy we used to hear during the 90s often associated with black boys, and nowadays you hear more and more in the media and social media. The term roadman, even the algorithm across the internet creates spaces. Search engines automatically link the term gang and gang violence with black ethnic groups. Any normal kid that dresses a certain way or talks a certain way and looks a certain way becomes a roadman, creating a space for stereotypes and police and media to feast. For example, a fight between two groups from neighbouring estates might suddenly be called a gang war, even if it was more about friendship groups or postcode rivalry.
I do a lot of legal work with people who've been convicted of knife crime, young black men who've been convicted of these offences. And one thing I noticed in the discussion around it is just how little we talk about them. And when we do talk about them, we talk about them as though they're aliens, or the more common phrase, gang members. And gang members has been the most dehumanising, awful word we could use, because it pretends that this is something far different to what it is.
In both the UK and the US, young black people have developed rich and distinct linguistic styles, often blending local dialects, African or Caribbean influences, and creative innovations. In the US, this might include African American vernacular English with its own grammar, rhythm, and expressions.
Fuck is you deaf, man? I said we ain't got shit going on right now, B.
In the UK, forms like multicultural London English or regional dialects have emerged.
What? Bro, I don't know about your thing, you know, my brother, but you see my thing, I was getting girls from way back.
Man, sound like the unit took the food store. Score, furthermore, I'm swearing on your big brother, fam. Who's this brother, Maxwell? He's a dickhead,
drawing on Jamaican patois, West African slang, and London street vernacular. These speech styles are part of black cultural identity, creativity, and solidarity, not just slang. However, mainstream society often judges people based on their speech, especially when that speech doesn't align with standard or prestige varieties. Like Standard English, some black people who speak in this way might be stereotyped as uneducated, aggressive, criminal, or unprofessional.
Fuck you looking at?
Regardless of their intelligence or background, this reflects linguistic prejudice, which is really a form of racial bias dressed up as concern for proper English. Films, news, and social media often depict young black speakers in narrow ways, linking their speech to crime, rebellion, or poverty. This reinforces stereotypes. Because of those stereotypes, these speech patterns can exclude speakers from certain spaces. Schools, teachers might interpret non-standard grammar as a lack of ability rather than a difference in dialect. Jobs. Employers may judge an applicant's professionalism by their accent or vocabulary. Social spaces, people may feel pressure to code switch, changing their speech to fit white or middle-class norms. So, the way black youth speak doesn't cause exclusion. Society's reaction to it does. The exclusion arises from linguistic discrimination, not from the language itself. Clothing styles from tracksuits, hoodies, chains, trainers, or streetwear brands in the UK to baggy jeans, baseball caps, or Jordans in the US often emerge from black cultural creativity and black subcultures like hip-hop, grime, drill, or dancehall. For many young people, however, society often reads clothing choices through racialized lenses. The criminalisation of hoodies, tracksuits, or scully hats are frequently associated with gangs or criminality in media and policing, especially when worn by young black men. You know, think of stop and search rates in the UK or the US practice of racial profiling. Unprofessional labels. Across both the UK and the US, black hairstyles are often unfairly linked to negative assumptions of rebellion, danger, or laziness. Styles like locks, braids, cornrows, or afros are too often labelled as unkempt or unfit for formal spaces. The same styles, when worn by white celebrities, are suddenly celebrated as trendy or bohemian. This double standard exposes the underlying issue. It's not the hair itself that society rejects, but the blackness that's associated with it. These stereotypes have real-world consequences. In schools, some students are sent home or even suspended for violating grooming policies that ban natural black hairstyles. In workplaces, many young men feel pressure to cut their hair short or tame their curls to appear professional. In public, their hair can mark them as targets for stop and search policing or unfair suspicion. All of this sends a message. To be accepted, you must change who you are. The restrictions, both written and unspoken, push some young black men into a sort of double life by having to code switch not only in their speech but in their appearance, trimming parts of their culture to fit into systems built around white norms.